Why is English intonation so hard? What's the difference between English and Chinese intonation? Hi, I'm Wayne. In this video, I'm going to help you understand why native Chinese speakers find it difficult to perform English intonation by showing you the difference between English and Chinese intonation. So, what is intonation? Basically, intonation is a combining of tonality, tonicity, and tone. All languages have their own intonation. But what are tonality, tonicity, and tone? I'm going to explain them one by one. Tonality is how you divide the intonation units. You may think of it as rhythm. One intonation unit can only have one tonic and one specific tone, so it's important to know how to divide the intonation units. What's the difference between Chinese and English tonality? In Chinese, every single word is basically a separate intonation unit unless the word is a modal particle you don't need to emphasize. For example, you can see that each of these words carries a tonic and has a specific tone, which makes them separate intonation units. But in English, it's a bit different. Firstly, the number of intonation units depends on how many words you want to emphasize. For example, this is English. This sentence only has one intonation unit if you only want to emphasize one word. This is English. Also, it can be divided into two intonation units if you want to emphasize two words. Secondly, the way you divide the intonation units also affects the meaning of the discourse. For example, those who sold quickly made a profit means a profit was made by those who sold quickly. Those who sold quickly made a profit means a profit was quickly made by those who sold. How about tonicity? Tonicity is where you place a tonic. What's the difference between Chinese and English tonicity? In Chinese, you basically place a tonic on every single word unless the word is a modal particle you don't need to emphasize. For example, you can see that each of these words carries a tonic, as they are separate intonation units. But in English, it's a bit different. We only place the tonic on the primary stressed syllables of the words you want to emphasize. Most of the time, it's the primary stressed syllables of content words. For example, this is English. These syllables carry the tonic. Although it's not common, the tonic can also be placed on function words if you want to emphasize them. For example, this is English. The last one is tone. Native Chinese speakers should be familiar with the term tone, since it's one of the most important elements in Chinese. Tone represents the movement of pitch within the intonation unit. The basic movements of pitch are falling, rising, and remaining level. But that does not mean there are only 3 pitch movements. You can actually combine them and have infinite pitch movements. The third tone of Chinese Mandarin is a good example of the combining of 2 basic pitch movements. A falling and a rising movements of pitch are combined. So what's the difference between Chinese tone and English tone? In Chinese, due to the fact that every single word is basically a separate intonation unit, unless the word is a modal particle you don't need to emphasize, the number of words basically determines the number of tones. For example, you can see that each of these words carries a specific tone as they are separate intonation units. Also, in Chinese, different tones change the lexical meaning of the word. So Chinese has a specific set of tones and different words have different specific tones. For example, each of these words with the same pronunciation has different lexical meanings just because they have different specific tones. But in English, the number of tones depends on the number of intonation units, which also depends on how many words you want to emphasize. For example, this is English has 1 tone. This is English has 2 tones. Also, in English, different tones do not change the lexical meaning of the word, but different tones change the message you want to convey. For example, yes, 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 yes have the same lexical meaning even with different tones, but the messages they convey are different because the tones are different. So now you know the difference between English and Chinese intonation. Then why is English intonation so hard for us native Chinese speakers? The most believable reason is a drastic difference in dividing intonation units. In Chinese, when basically every single word is a separate intonation unit, you really don't have to think much about dividing intonation units and even the tonic. So most native Chinese speakers are so used to having every single word as a separate intonation unit that they find it hard to adapt when an intonation unit is usually more than 1 word or even up to a whole sentence. It's also hard for them to adapt to choosing a tonic since they don't have to do such a thing in Chinese. Also, they cannot memorize the tones of English like they did when learning Chinese, because a tone involves more than one word most of the time in English. So how do we make it easier to perform English intonation? The answer is by understanding how English intonation is performed. If you want to know how, you may click the link below to check out. This video ends here. Thank you for watching and see you next time.